Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Nothing Phone 2 and see how these particular phones hold up, or how this phone holds up in 2025. Now, in my personal opinion, I definitely do think that the Nothing Phone 2 was a very, very interesting device when it came down to it. I think this is one of those phones that you can probably take a look at and still think to yourself that it's still a pretty good device. There's some highs within these phones and some lows. So we'll take a look at it throughout this whole entire video. First things first though, if you do want to go ahead and pick up either one of these phones, why do I keep saying either one? If you want to pick up this phone at any point throughout this video, you can click in the first couple links down in the description below, and you can get them from there, and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of the Nothing Phone 2. This particular phone came out in 2023. So it's not really a super old phone anymore. It's a pretty good, well-priced phone for the most part, which I think is something very important to kind of keep in mind here. So with the Nothing Phone 2, this phone was supposed to be somewhat of a more budget-tiered phone when it first came out. It's going to be giving you a 6.7-inch LTPO OLED display on the front side. And that is a pretty decent type of price, or that's a decent display to have inside of this phone. It's a 120 Hz display, and it does give you 1600 nits of brightness, which is actually pretty good when it comes down to it. So as I've always stated, if you're going to go through and if you're going to pick up a phone, I definitely do think buying a phone like this is actually a pretty decent experience, because the display itself is actually pretty good. The experience itself is actually going to be pretty good as well. So I do think those things in and of itself, it is a very big thing to keep in mind there. Now, on top of that, you're still getting 1600 nits of brightness, like I said before, which is really nice. You're getting a USB Type-C port on the bottom, which is great. I love having USB Type-C, and you're going to be getting that type of capability within this type of device too, which I think is really important to have. You're also going to be getting these flat sides all throughout this whole entire phone. It's an aluminum frame device, so that's going to make this phone feel and look really good from that particular perspective as well. On top of that, on the backside, a really cool thing going on for these phones when they first originally came out was the fact that with the Nothing Phone 2, these types of phones were actually going to be giving you these clear backs with this thing called the glyph interface on the backside. So this glyph interface was basically going to be this LED light situation, which is going to go through and kind of demonstrate and kind of flash these lights around you, which was actually something that was really cool. So I actually did like that a lot about this type of device, and if you were to go through and get this type of device from that standpoint, you're actually going to be getting a really, really cool looking phone, because it was so unique. And when you take a look at other types of devices, I feel like this type of device does a really good job at holding up very well against, some other phones that you might look at. So I do think from that standpoint too, that was in and of itself another really important thing to kind of keep in mind there from that particular situation as well. Now, on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here is that this phone does still give you things that you'd probably want inside a majority of flagships nowadays. Things like, wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. That's something I love. It's not the fastest reverse wireless charging, but it's still something that I actually love seeing, and I really want to go through and be able to buy phones like this that do give me that type of capability. That's why iPhones make me mad sometimes, but other than that, when I look at the outside of this phone, I think it still holds up very, very well against a lot of the competition. On top of that, when you do kind of take a look at this phone compared to maybe some of the other competitions, especially when it comes down to the price tag, this phone as of this point is going to be around that $700 something market inside of Amazon, which is a waste. It's not really that expensive in the used market. I just don't think they've updated their prices for the most part. But if you do find it for that price, I really would not recommend buying it, because that is a super overpriced, price to pay for a phone like that. So when it comes down to the exterior and all that, I think this phone does do a good job at kind of holding up very well when you kind of think about it from that standpoint. Now, on top of that, when you kind of take a look at this phone in some other areas, this phone on the exterior, you also have to keep in mind the camera setup. So this phone is giving you a dual camera setup on the backside, a 50 megapixel wide and then a 50 megapixel ultra wide camera. Then you're also getting a 32 megapixel camera on the front side. In my personal opinion, this is one of those things to keep in mind here. From what I can see, you are still getting an okay camera on this thing, but this thing really is not that great of a camera when it comes down to it. And I would highly recommend kind of thinking about, if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, you probably want to go through and buy a phone that might be giving you a little bit of better capability when it comes down to that camera standpoint. And that is essentially kind of what's going on in this particular situation when it comes down to it, from what I can tell. So with this particular phone, you're still able to get 4K at 60 on the back. You're still able to get 1080p on the front, but I'm going to be honest, 1080p on the front really is not that great. And if you're wanting to go through and get a better, kind of situation, it would make a lot more sense, in my personal opinion, to kind of go through and get a device that would be better. And I don't really feel like this device is going to be giving you a better experience there when it comes down to it from the camera side. So from that side too, kind of keep that in mind when it kind of comes down to it. Now, on top of that, in terms of software longevity, as of this point, this device is still supported with software. It's still going to be giving you Android versions, but it's not really going to be that type of version setup that's going to be lasting for like a super long amount of time. Like this device, for the most part, like I said before, it's still supported with software, so you're still going to be able to take advantage of it, but it's not really going to be giving you a situation where this device is going to be lasting you for like a super long amount of time. This isn't one of those devices that you're going to be able to get today and keep it for years and years and years. It's already kind of, a couple years old now, and after the next software update, maybe it'll be kind of stagnant for a little bit. So that is one of those things to keep in mind there. Like if you're going to go through and like pick up another device, like I said before, you might want to go through and pick up a phone that's going to be giving you better, longer lifespan. And this one might not be the one that's giving you that in that particular situation too. So kind of keep that in mind. When it comes down to the battery life standpoint, this phone is giving you a 4700 mAh battery, which as always is pretty decent. That's a really big size battery. Most phones, I would say, in this caliber though, in this screen size, are giving you about a 5000 mAh battery. So that is kind of interesting that you're not getting like the biggest size battery of all time, but I still think that's totally okay. And this type of phone, from that standpoint, is still going to be a really, really good performing device when it comes down to it in that particular situation. So those are big things to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind here too is when it comes down to basically some other areas like their performance. This phone is going to be giving you the Snapdragon 8 Plus Gen 1 chipset inside with basically 8 to 12 gigabytes of RAM. Now that is a pretty good amount of RAM to have inside of a device, and that's a pretty good amount of power to have inside of a device too. And like I said before, if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, it is a really, really nice thing to be able to go through and buy a phone like this that's going to be giving you this type of capability. So that is something that I actually have always enjoyed within these types of phones. And if you are going to go through and buy a device, I do think that is a pretty nice thing to keep in mind there too, because the performance is actually pretty decent. The 8 Gen 1 chipsets always were a little bit finicky though, they were a little wonky, but I think for the most part, if you're going to go through and pick up a phone, you are still going to be getting a really good experience with this type of phone when it comes down to it from that standpoint. So overall, in my personal opinion, I definitely do think these types of phones are still very, very decent. But I do think if you have the money, you might as well go look elsewhere. I think a Samsung Galaxy S23 is one of those phones that I would highly recommend buying this year. And I would also say phones like some other devices here and there might be better, like a Google Pixel 8, an iPhone 14 Pro even. Those ones might be giving you better experiences overall than this type of device when it comes down to it. So in my personal opinion, that's kind of how I see these phones kind of holding up in 2025. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.